And let's just have a do-over. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of A Piece of Ash. This is my weekly show about wargaming, what's going on in the market, miniatures, and the exciting world of tabletop games. Now this week, we're going to talk a little bit about Kickstarter before we kick off with the chat and the mailbag. And the reason for that's going to be that it was Interplanetary this weekend, which was Carlos and the boys at Corvus Belli's big do. 116 players threw down for the finals, the world finals for ITS. And there was also a keynote, lots of discussion about Aristia, the new big coming up board game, and the current state of wargaming. And the reason it's got Kickstarter in my brain was during the keynote, there was a great Q&A, and Carlos talked a little bit about the plans for Aristia, the manga, and how that was going to fit into sort of like the corporate plans for a company like Corvus Belli. And he talked a little bit about the impact that things like crowdfunding has had on what he sees as the wargaming market. And he made some really interesting points too about the wargaming market and how it's changed over the years. And how it's harder and harder to keep people's attention for a little while. So the points that he made were fairly simple to do with Corvus Belli, and it was that they're going to stay focused on their core product, which is Infinity. And they have a really sort of like structured and well thought out release schedule for Infinity. And I can actually attest to this as a fan, as a consumer of their products. There's something every Monday for Infinity. There's typically something for almost every faction, even if it's just a model or two. And what happens is my interest is constantly sort of like revitalized in the game as new profiles come out, new things happen. And they tend to do one or two big launches a year, right? So they have either a new box set, a big expansion box, an army box, something like that, or a new book that comes out each year. They launch at a big show and stuff like that. And so the whatchamacallit? Oh, Dancing Pigeon says, I'm still in Spain and I got to run to dinner, but I came 10th at Interplanetary out of 116, running 10 orders, 2 tag Joan list. Good job, buddy. So sort of interrupt my thought there. Lots of stuff going on right now in the market, basically, but what they've got is like a really steady release schedule. And so I think what's interesting is his comments about things like crowdfunds and how keeping people's attention right now is a challenge in the wargaming market, because people are very used to spending money, being really excited when they spend the money, being kind of excited when stuff comes in, so from things like crowdfunds and Kickstarters, but then maybe only staying with that product for like 1 to 2 years. And you can see lots of companies that use Kickstarters almost exclusively as a way of generating almost like investment income to push the next sort of like thing forward for their year, have that almost as a business model. You don't see a lot of releases month to month. What you see instead is a big glut release, which is the crowdfund, and then that stuff goes to backers, and then that stuff becomes generally available for sale. But it's a very weird market, and I think what it's leading to, and this is where my thing with like who's to get Kickstarter comes in, it's leading to consumer exhaustion almost, because it's all highs and lows, peaks and valleys. And I think that once you start riding that train, you end up riding that train for a really long time, because you get stuck into a cycle, right? You have a huge glut of income coming through Kickstarter. You spend that income producing whatever it is that you've committed to producing, getting it to fans. But in the meantime, your actual like working capital is all tied up in that. You're not doing like monthly, weekly releases. You're not necessarily doing a lot of like other stuff apart from releasing that big thing that you've promised to do in the Kickstarter. And so once that delivers, you're basically on to the next Kickstarter. You're on to like, we're through the money now. Stuff's available to retail, and like a little bit of money's coming in through that. And we've built up our catalog of what we make. But because your consumers are basically spending out once a year, you know what I mean? When you do your Kickstarter, you're almost beholden to do the next Kickstarter. So some companies seem to break that cycle. They might get started based on a Kickstarter. Like I think a good example of that probably is Guild Ball from Steamforged Games. They got started on a Kickstarter, but then they got into like a really comfortable sort of like release schedule that happened typically monthly, and their ball is kind of rolling now. They are using Kickstarters for their other products, which is their board game products, but Guild Ball itself seems relatively stable in like a steady flow of releases and stuff. But then there's some companies that seem to never really break the cycle, and you don't see a lot of monthly releases from them. So for instance, Mantic does lots of Kickstarters. They do Kickstarters all the time, but then unless it's stuff that was in the Kickstarter coming out, you don't necessarily see a lot of stuff between Kickstarters getting released. Occasionally there's armies for like Kings of War and stuff like that, but you might get like one kind of new thing per year for like the game once it's out, as opposed to having like a steady system of releases that come out all the time. And I think that it's funny because the more of those you have on the go as a consumer, the more tired you get, and the more sort of like I guess for me it's just I don't want to spend money and not have the reward of spending that money. I want to be excited with something when I'm excited about it. And so Kickstarters are a big turnoff for me when they're used, I think, as a pre-order system, as opposed to being used for what I think the original intent one, which was sort of like entrepreneurial investment income. So I love Kickstarters where I'm not necessarily going to do it myself, but when someone's starting to try to do something new, they're trying to crowdfund an entirely new project. But more and more when I look through Kickstarter and I scroll through the news feed, all I see is existing companies sort of kicking their next product to the public and not risking their own income investing in producing it. And that says a bunch of things to me as a consumer. I think now over time, I look at a Kickstarter and I think, well, if you're an existing company using a Kickstarter, I get that maybe you don't have the investment capital to do this, but that's not the way that we used to do things as businesses. We used to believe in products and make products of such a high quality that we would, and I'm talking about we as in like the wargaming market, we would invest our own money into bringing it to the sort of the table. And I get the Kickstarter is a great platform for that, but I think that exhaustion comes, for me personally, from the fact that like you've only got I guess my sort of like empathy once or twice, right? Like we have this thing, we've designed it, we think it's really cool, we want to have it. But when that's just every single year, it's this new, hey, we designed this great thing, can we have some money to go make it to get it to you guys? I start thinking, well, where did the last bunch of money, where's the sales gone from the thing you made last time? And that's where I think the exhaustion kicks in from, is if you made this great thing, you raised a whole bunch of money, you got it to your backers, but why is it not still making you money? Right? That's the key question with the Kickstarter thing, and I think that kind of that tees into that whole thing that Bostria was saying, which is the market's peaking and valleying, but why is it doing that? If investment income's coming in initially to get things going, why is that investment income not building a company that then is making carry-on sales to the point where it can then reinvest in itself and make the next product? If the consumer's always investing in the next product being developed, what happened to the rest of that money, and why is money not continuing to come in from the population of that game? Because what that says to me is the most players that game is ever going to have probably is at the peak of its Kickstarter, right? So when it kickstarts, that's the most people that are interested in it. And you should make continuous sales by the number of people that like that thing growing, getting bigger, and spending money, right? And that should be the money coming back into the business. They've launched off the pad, now they're flying, and the fuel coming into the plane is the continued population of that game growing. And so I get worried when that doesn't happen, right? I look at it and I go, why isn't it getting bigger? Did it not make it to retailers? Is it not being played in stores? How is it, is it just remaining this internet game phenomenon where it might have a huge Kickstarter, but then because no one's playing it in public and it's not out there available on a shelf somewhere, the number of people playing it don't get bigger over time, and the amount of money coming back into that company as return on capital is just not coming in. So there's my 2 cents. I'm thinking about Kickstarter a lot right now. And I understand that creating products is hard, but there are a lot of companies out there right now that do it, that will do big risk, return things without going to Kickstarter. Great example, that's X-Wing, right? So X-Wing was, and Fantasy Flight Games is a well-established company, right? They're good, they have obviously investment capital, they've been around for a while, but they have a really expensive intellectual property, probably a very big licensing deal, a lot of initial investment. And it went, instead of going through the internet, it went through retailers, and it sold like crazy. And people kept playing it, and it's still being played. And that money continues to be reinvested by the business into new waves of stuff that come out all the time. And obviously, every game is going to reach a saturation point. You then need a new edition, you need something else. And X-Wing, I think, is starting to plateau in just like the amount of people it's captured. But that's a traditional game launch where a company's invested their own money, and that money has returned to the business, they've reinvested, and they've sent it back out. And you've seen it, you couldn't go anywhere without seeing X-Wing being played. Like I think when we were at, when I was at Adepticon this last year, there was like a 250 person X-Wing tournament happening. Like it was crazy, like huge numbers of people playing X-Wing. And so I think there's the opposite example of what happens when businesses share the wealth with retailers and distributors, go through additional channels. It's on the game's on the ground then, not in the atmosphere. And I think that that's a really interesting, how do you hold people's attention for more than 2 years? Well, you get your game being played out in public. And historically, there's lots of companies with track records. I can name a few just off the top of my head that have launched that way. Privateer Press is a great example of that. Their original year one, year two or whatever press gang program was all about getting people playing it in the stores in front of other people so the retailers could sell it, sharing that stuff with retailers and the distributors, right? And that growth was exponential. Obviously, X-Wing's another good example. And so you have almost these two types of game launches now, where one seems to be it's fast nickels, and the other one is slow dimes, right? So you've got money coming in for not forever. In forever in game terms, 10 years, let's say. You got a return on capital. You get your stuff present out in the population. Whereas the other one is you get all of these nickels up front, but then what happens afterwards doesn't necessarily build your business, and you're stuck in this routine of like going back for more nickels, basically, as opposed to constantly generating dimes. And my brain, because my brain works in that kind of way, right? It works in that business way of like return on investment, return on capital. It seems crazy to me to keep going after fast nickels when you can invest in slow dimes. So I guess that's my 2 cents. That's my editorial for this piece of ash. Knock on wood, you know what I mean, and think about what it means for the future for miniature gaming. But Kickstarters are something I think people might be starting to get tired of, and they definitely show a track record of not necessarily building a business. So let's jump to the chat and say hello to people, see what's what, and say hi. Obviously, people talking about Kickstarters now. They're also talking about the fact my sound was off for the first half of this, which I will cut out of the video later on. So if you don't know what if you don't know what I'm talking about later on, it's because my mic. I do this thing where I adjust my mic and the mute button is right on the front of my mic, and I think I hit it with my thumb, but it doesn't it's got like a heat sensor, like it doesn't like depress or anything like that. So I never feel it when I do it. And when I look at the chat as I'm like talking, and it's like no sound. I look down and my mic's flashing. It's a Nessie blue mic, and like I've somehow muted it again. Like I should just put tape over it, I think, and not touch it. These are hilarious. I blame Owen for the lack of sound. Yeah, it's funny. Dancing Pigeon talking about being in Spain and running the dinner and being at Interplanetary. It sounds like it was awesome. Actually, it was a Joni list that won Interplanetary this year. I think I made a comment on my Facebook page about the 5 mission list for Interplanetary this year, and it was like all fight missions. It was a direct action tournament. So like, if there was every year that Joni and the Pain Train was going to win, this was the year. Which Owen will now take as a sign that he should have gone to Spain this year and played Interplanetary. As his favorite original N3 list that he ever played is, of course, Joni and the Hospitalers with some like backup dudes. What else we got? Reaper's Kickstarters are basically glorified pre-orders. Yep. What's interesting with Reaper, though, Anthony Lee said this, is that Reaper's already got that catalog of miniatures, and it is completely a glorified pre-order. What they're doing is they're getting all of their metal line cast in that ready-to-paint vinyl. And it's exactly what I'm talking about. I think they're stuck in that now. But what's interesting is they could probably just reinvest in that. It just seems like it's, again, like I said earlier, it's a good way to get fast nickels. So you can get fast cash injection into your company to keep it going. And I think they're having new stuff sculpted too, probably with some of that money, which seems good. What else we got? It's great stuff at great prices, but it's a huge amount of time between releases. There's that. Mantic Ride's Kickstarter is quite good. Yep, for all their games. They absolutely do. Dancing Pigeon says, Mantic's a company I really wanted to like, but they've screwed up so many Kickstarters, especially for us Aussies, that I can't just back them anymore. Yeah, it's got to be tough. I mean, that's obviously going to be a thing for anybody that's really far from what they're kickstarting. And I think that's like another risk of the internet, is that, especially when you run Kickstarters, there's been Kickstarters. There's a very famous example of this, actually. Oh my God, my hair looks gray right now. My hair's going so gray. There's a very famous example of I think it was the Chaosium Call of Cthulhu RPG reprint, where they actually bankrupted themselves on a Kickstarter because their stretch rewards and their goals were so big, and they had this is, I think, a fairly early on Kickstarter. You can read articles about this. But I think, and it's a classic risk of Kickstarter one, they didn't have a system for tracking where everyone was. And because some of these Kickstarters were like, you get 7, 8, 9 extra books, what would happen was, this is being Kickstarted to like New Zealand or Australia or Japan or somewhere where it's far, far away from. I think it was based in the United States. And like literally the cost of shipping that, because the shipping was included in whatever the Kickstarter was, the cost of shipping is greater than the value that was Kickstarted by like like double, like 200% or something insane like that. And so the company literally went into the red. They kickstarted to a huge amount, for whatever it was, probably a couple $100,000. But then it ended up costing like $1.5 million to do it. And so they had this wonderful product they managed to produce, but when it came time to ship it, they just bankrupted themselves. Like they just blew up overnight. There's articles written about it actually at the whole whatchamacallit, Ruard McKenzie. Ash commitment to the live show at the potty in the corner. Yeah, man, it's right there. My son started potty training just this week. I totally forgot it was there. That's so funny. That's awesome. Hey man, when you got kids, that's what happens. You put the potty in the living room, and that's how you get them to sit on it. Even just to practice sitting on it. And he loves sitting there, man. He'll just sit there and like eat his snacks, sitting on the practice potty. It like lights up, and like you can push buttons and stuff. It's one of those ones that like when they finally do pee in it, it sings to you. So yeah, no, it's just sitting there. You guys can enjoy the fact that I'm potty training my son. He's 2. He's gonna figure it out. He's not doing so good yet, but he's figured out telling us when he needs to potty. He just hasn't figured out like the timing on that. So he'll tell us like right beforehand or like during, but he won't tell us before, like with enough time we can get him on the potty yet. But it's all practice makes perfect. So I commit to the fact that I will move that at some point. Willie277 says Manic does everything on Kickstarter and delivers on the Kickstarter well past its due date. Manic, in my opinion, is the worst funder on Kickstarter. I wouldn't say that, Willie. There's tons of companies that are far worse than them. Manic, the difference is Manic has delivered all their Kickstarters. Whether timing things happen, you don't get it all at once. That's just going to happen. People who are out in the boundaries are going to not get their stuff at the same time. Yeah, but there are Mantic is a saint, I think, in comparison to some companies out there, with how they with how they deliver. Because there's some companies that just don't. They just run away with your money. Like, at least it all gets there in the end. Delivering late is fine. Things happen. If you were an investor and you were willing to risk your income on a speculation, I think that's something that people don't understand about Kickstarters. Even these companies that are using them as a pre-order, this is still speculative investment. You are investing on something that may or may not happen. You have an idea of when it may show up, but there's no expectation on people as to when it's going to actually deliver. So you have to accept that it can come in late, and most likely will, because things happen. But just not delivering away like at all and running with your money can also happen. I use Kickstarter if I feel the project needs it. Congo the Jormungand says. I think that's how I say it, Jormungand. I use Kickstarter if I feel said project needs it. Yeah, well, that's where I'm at too, right? Like, and I think that for me, it's a balance between what am I looking at, as far as what are these people trying to do, if they're trying to accomplish something. And I'll actually do research. Like, I'll send people messages and ask questions like, hey, are you guys going to be doing, the first question I usually ask you when I think about doing Kickstarter is, are you guys going to be doing Kickstarters all the time, or is this to get your company started and then you're going to have general releases? Because if it's A, I'm not interested. If it's B, I'm totally interested in backing you guys because I think your product looks great and whatever. Because for me, that's the rub. And then it's a scale of like how big the company is. If the Kickstarter is not necessarily for, I have an idea, I want to make something, but I'm a really small company and I want to bring something into production, but I don't have the capital to do that. I don't have the investment to do that because I'm a hand-to-mouth guy. I'm 2 guys in a basement. Then I'll absolutely back it because that to me is fine, right? And there's no risk there. It's if the project's already made, you know what I mean? Like, here's all the things we already have. They're already done. We're literally just doing this as a pre-order system to bring it to you right now. Like, the delivery date is like tomorrow. That's different from some of these bigger Kickstarters where it's all these stretch goals that aren't actually sculpted yet, all these ideas we have. And even the bigger companies will do that. They won't actually put things even close to into production until, like, there won't even be physical models until after the Kickstarter is over. And to me, that's not the same thing, right? Like, I'll definitely think about that as far as whether or not I want to, like, actually, like, risk my money and other people's money. And I'm actually very picky about what I talk about Kickstarter-wise too on my Facebook, my social media, and my YouTube channel because of that. Because if I'm to talk about something, I say something, I'm excited about something, chances are someone watching is going to feed off my enthusiasm, get excited too, and I feel real ownership that I am risking their money at that point. Right, I'm risking A, my reputation, and B, their money. So I get really nervous about talking about crowdfunding in my social media platforms and on YouTube, because there can be a knock-on effect of people can go and lose their money too if it doesn't happen, like if it just doesn't wash. So we got Simon's Zombicide Green Horde stopped at $5 million, which is the biggest yet, probably. Aaron F says, hello Ash, hello all. Rid says, Ash, is that a mount for an Imperial Knight on your immediate right of the blue coat? I don't know. On my immediate right, do you think this thing? That's Rainbow Dash. That's what that is. And one of the things that it's, if you ever get asked the question of how many ponies, little My Little Ponies, should a little girl own or a little boy own, the answer is always going to be wrong, because the correct response is they're going to have all of them eventually, because they just appear here now. Kevin Shelley says, I'm kind of sick of Kickstarter exclusives. Yeah, I'm okay with Kickstarter exclusives as a thank you. It's funny because I have a very different opinion of limited edition stuff than most people do. Because to me, a limited edition is about capturing a memory. And people used to complain about limited editions when I was at Workshop, especially Games Day models of like, well, why can't everyone have one? Blah, blah, blah. Well, that's the point. The point of having something special that no one else has, or that was available in one place, is every time you hold it and you look at it, you remember that experience, right? So like, I can look at all of my Games Day minis and remember what happened to that Games Day, the headaches, the foot pain, the gold bond, like all of the terrible things that happen getting ready for, running, and then after a Games Day that you guys would never see because it's all behind the scenes at 4 o'clock in the morning. And that to me is the point of an exclusive or limited edition. So I'm fine with exclusive and limited edition miniatures. I think that there's obviously some gray areas where, like, if it's really powerful and it's not available anywhere else and gives you an advantage or something like that in tournaments or organized play or whatever, that's probably not a good idea. I love variant sculpts, so just different sculpts of the same model that's generally available. And that tends to be what they do in Kickstarter. They've learned, there's been enough Kickstarters now, they've all learned those lessons. They know how Kickstarter works. And you don't make a sculpt of something that's unique. What you do instead is you make sculpts of things typically that are just a version of something that already exists. Now, some things don't do that, obviously. There's things like, I have all the exclusives from the, what was it called? Sedition Wars Kickstarter from way back when, one of the first Kickstarters for tabletop miniature games. And it's got like that's where my Isaac Clarke miniature comes from. My Serenity Crew miniatures come from. There's a bunch of miniatures I have that people would always ask. I think I use them in Rogue Stars, and people were like, where'd you get the Isaac Clarke miniature? And I'm like, you had to back a Kickstarter from 10 years ago almost, like, or whatever it was. And that's obviously a very different mentality. Sorry, it wasn't 10 years ago. It was probably 7 years ago now, 8 years ago. Those are different things. So I'm okay typically with exclusives as long as they're variations of something you can already get. Random crap name 80 says, I feel the stretch goal reward system that's grown out of Kickstarter has naturally benefited miniature collectors, and board game minis blew up. I definitely think there's been a knock on for that, definitely, like 100%. I think the difference is, and I think there's actually a difference in board games and other things too, because I see a lot of independent board games still, because I think board games are actually by nature easier to produce typically than miniature games are. Their components aren't necessarily as complex, right? It's about printing card and paper, which is a really established industry. The board game printing industry is actually a really established industry, so there's a lot of direct lines people to talk to. It's not quite the same as miniature games, where like there's more moving pieces in that project typically than there's in a board game project, because the board game project's already more mass market and well known to like the industry side of it when you're making things. And there's been some companies that have just straight up started out of Kickstarter. Like, for instance, what is it? Cards Against Humanity, right? They're a big fish now in the gaming pond because of Kickstarter. Like, they managed to start their project that way. And they've done a few projects since then, but mostly it's been, I think the ongoing sales of Cards Against Humanity have been steady enough that they've managed to build into whatever the next thing is and the next business project is. Whereas some companies will release a board game and just be done. And I think that's neat. And I think some people just have this like idea of a bucket list. They don't want to make a board game. They want to become a board game designer. And I've seen a lot of Kickstarter board games where that designer then goes on to get employed in like a board game design firm. And I think that's really the neat thing about the board game side of that, is that it almost seems like it's like a talent pen for the board game industry, which is just a much bigger industry than miniature game will probably ever be. Chris W., the title alone deserves a thumbs up. Just want to see product in stores for a change. It's so funny. That's such a complaint now, and I think a legitimate complaint by a lot of people, is they just want to be able to buy stuff, and it's hard to buy stuff sometimes. And that seems like a real thing that people in the business, in the miniature wargaming business, should be recognizing. If you are in the business of making things, there should never be a barrier to buying things. And if there is a barrier to buying things, then something is intrinsically wrong. You need to look at your business model and say, if factory to shelf, there's some kind of disconnect that's making it so that this customer's having a hard time getting stuff, what do we do to fix that? Not just what's the next what's the next project list or task list or like art stream that we need to get going so that we can have our next big injection of cash. And I think that fast nickels or slow dimes analogy really holds true in this case, because businesses that are looking at still being here in 20 years are always looking for long-term investment, right? For how do you make a product that scales infinitely? You want to make a starter set that doesn't just sell off a Kickstarter. You want to make a starter set or a box game or a board game that sells for the next 15 to 20 years, right? You want to make Monopoly. You don't want to make, what was that? Fireball Island from the 80s. Possibly the most complicated board game of all time. It had this huge, I had Fireball Island. It was amazing. It came in a giant box, had this huge board, and you walked up the island, and then fireballs chased you down if you hit the wrong thing. But who remembers Fireball Island, right? People play Monopoly for 50 years. Whereas Fireball Island, it was probably the coolest commercial and was one of the coolest board games I'd ever seen. I mean, maybe 10% of you watching this who are in my age group are actually going to understand what I'm talking about when I say Fireball Island. Object Keith says, I really don't like how Kickstarter makes it hard to grow a game locally. It often doesn't make sense for local games to carry a Kickstarter game because the early adopters have everything they need. Absolutely. I think that's an objection for those retailers too. Even if it is at the distributor stage, the distributor might call them or mention it to them in a call, and then they'll say something like, well, yeah, I've been talking about it with 2 or 3 people. When I asked them what they want to buy, they said, we have everything because we did the Kickstarter. Why would I invest my money now? So it's funny because if you think about this in terms of just 2 streams of investment, you have retailer investment where they're going to invest in sharing part of that sale with you, right? They're going to give you some money for your product from the distributor, from you directly. They're going to put it on their shelves. They're going to advertise it for you for free. And then probably if people buy it and they like it, they're going to order more from you. And they're going to become a repeat customer. They're going to keep ordering the same product from you out of your warehouse over and over again. Whereas if it's someone like an individual, once I've ordered it once, it's very unlikely unless I need a little bit more of it to play the game, it's very unlikely I'm going to be a repeat customer for the exact same thing I just bought. Whereas a retailer, because he's trading that sale onto a consumer, he'll order that same starter set 100 times. If it sells well, if it keeps going. You know how many X-Wing starter sets got sold? There was wait lists. The local stores around here had call me sheets for when they came in. It was like the Nintendo Wii of miniature gaming. You know what I mean? When that thing came out, there was people lining up to try and find it. So I think it's funny because if you're a business, you need to actually take a step back, I think, sometimes from your business model and say, well, which of these 2 things am I interested in? Am I interested in having customers that are going to order the same thing out of my warehouse so I can keep making it, I can keep selling to them over and over again, and they're going to go on and find me more customers, right? And build my customer pool bigger and bigger and bigger. So this thing that I made, I can actually scale infinitely. I can keep selling it forever, right? I can make a thing that I don't get paid for it once, I get paid for it 1,000,000 times. Or do I make something, sell it direct to the consumer through Kickstarter, and probably only sell it once? But I don't have a partner now in these retailers potentially or distributors to keep selling it over and over again. Or if I do have a partner, I mean, obviously I probably still have a partner, but they might not be the most helpful partner because there's already tons of it out there, right? It's already been sold to lots of customers. The hunting ground isn't as fertile as it would be otherwise. So it's an interesting thing. Martin Hogman says, here's an exclusive only for backers. 3 months later, same mini for sale. Nah, it's coming to a stop for me. Yeah, as long as it's not exactly the same miniature. If it's the same profile but a slightly different sculpt, I'm fine with having an exclusive. They did that with Guild Ball, where I think there was an alternate sculpt for all of the captains that came in the first wave. I thought that was super cool. I was fine with the Kickstarter exclusive captains because it was just, you got a different guy later on. Oric Lovegood says, to me, it's just stealing from retailers. I have no problem investing to get a game off the ground, but they use it to get, it's a one-off. I've stopped contributing to Kickstarter because of this. Anthony Lee says, X-Wing's got a huge advantage in the strength of its IP, though. See, Anthony, I don't think that's true anymore. I think that we have rose-colored glasses about that. I think that yes, it had some advantage in the IP, because obviously IP was a big deal. But if that was true, if IP really gives you an advantage, why aren't there more people playing the Halo miniature game? That's my question. Guaranteed there are more Halo fans out there right now than there are Star Wars fans. I know, sacrilege, but there's probably more young people who've heard of Halo, and there's more brand recognition through Microsoft Halo than there is through Star Wars. At this point, in the bulk of the generations that would have the time, money, and interest in playing miniature games. why isn't it selling better? Because I don't see anybody playing the Halo game. We have it, right? We have access to it, but like there was one guy given a demo at Adepticon this year, and it didn't seem to really have a presence, and it was all out. Everything was available. So I don't know what the answer is there, but if you're looking at recognizable IPs, this is pretty recognizable. Or even like the AVP games, like Aliens. Although I think Aliens is actually not as recognizable as Star Wars. Dancing Pigeon says, haha, I hate X-Wing for its release model. It has to be one of the most predatory methods of packaging product for any war game. No, of course. I think they've actually done a big part of like figuring out how the card gaming release schedule goes. I think that's the thing. That's the thing that they've actually done. It's not. It may not be like smart. I'm sorry, not necessarily smart. I think people catch on to it eventually. Like, experienced customers. They probably figure it out, but it is actually good business, right? So you might not like it as a consumer where like, oh, I need this R2-D2 card. I got to buy the Corellian Cruiser or whatever they're not going to use. There's two seats to that. So people who are interested purely in the game or maybe whatever they want for the game point of view, they're going to feel sort of like I guess probably preyed upon with that side. The other side of that is people that wanted to just buy the giant cool Corellian Cruiser are going to go, oh cool, I got this awesome RTG card, right? So like as much as yes, that's probably true that like there is some intentional reason for them packaging like that to incentivize both sides. I think it cuts two ways. I think it's more smart business than it is actually predatory. Depending on which side of the fence you're standing on, because you're going to feel like it's predatory if you're on one of them. Aaron says Guild Ball was a Kickstarter that seemed to have gotten traction sustained post Kickstarter. Yeah, that was. And it's funny because I just said that, Aaron. Is I think they're one of the examples of a company that's used their experience with crowdfunding to build a business that's fairly regularly generating income, and they've reinvested in themselves. And they have done crowdfunds for other product lines, like for the Dark Souls product line and whatever. But there's still always a steady release schedule for Guild Ball going and coming out, which I think is great. And they've actually shared sales with smaller companies too. So, for instance, Use on Minis has the Guild Ball tokens and measuring gauges and stuff sets now, and it's all licensed and has like their artwork and stuff on it. So like they've been smart at being like, what's our core business? How do we reinvest in that and make sure this release is still coming out? And they've even done a lot of what Corvus Belli did with scenery and stuff, and licensed out their product. They've already seen value in their product enough, so they've licensed it out to other people, and they make a return on that without having to do any work, and people get cool accessories and stuff too, and they share some of those sales. So I think that's a really smart business model. Random crap name 80. Someone here owns a game store. I don't own a game store. I just run a lot of them. Dancing Pigeon says, is it still better than Magic the Gathering? And how long has that been going strong? Oh, sorry. I think you're talking about the packaging thing still. It's basically the same as Magic the Gathering. And it's been going since the start. Phil Stevenson says, hey, Ash, just picked up a load of Manowar. I've wanted to since I first saw it in the 90s. Haven't had a chance to play it, hoping it doesn't show its age. What's your thoughts on it? So, Phil, if you haven't played Manowar before, it is a very 90s game. It's from the cardboard era of miniature wargaming, which means don't try and play it with more than like 5 ships. I wouldn't try and play it with more than 3 ships to start off with. I think the demo game had 3 ships in it, 3-on-3, because every ship has a little card to like manage everything that's going on the ship, like the condition of its sails, its guns, its crew, where the fires are burning on it, like stuff like that. So there's a lot of finicky micromanagement, like chits and stuff on one side. Don't let that distract you though. Just be aware that like because every time you include a new ship, you have to typically include a new card like that. The game can get very like board gamey management, and you get distracted from the miniatures, and you have to start looking at managing your cards. So something to think about when you're playing it for the first time. Paul Vidal says, Ash, what about Kickstarter for small businesses that are trying to start their own lines? Minis like Training for Witches Wonders videos. I think I covered that already when I said that I think that's a totally different thing. It's not using it as a pre-order system. And so it's about life cycles and stages, I think. And what is the intent with the original intended use of Kickstarter, where it's speculative investment income versus existing companies using it as a way to basically get a capital injection. So what you're talking about is, I'm an entrepreneur, I have an idea, I want to make something, start a company, start a business, versus I'm a business, I want some money so I can make the next thing I want to make, and I'm going to use this as a pre-order system because it's an easy way to get that cash injection so I can put things in production. And a lot of businesses use it the second way now, and I think that's what's leading to this exhaustion. you're not necessarily discovering new things on Kickstarter anymore or new ideas. You're just seeing the latest product offer from certain companies and what that means then for that business and it's in the way that it operates going forward. I talked about earlier, which is it gets in this cycle of Kickstarter to Kickstarter, not like steady monthly release. And of course, this was all kicked off my brain. If you go back to the beginning, ignore the no audio part that I'm going to cut out later on. It all comes back to this talk that Bostria had about the current state of the wargaming market and how is Kickstarter contributing to and affecting that. And what does that look like? Audrey Keith says, I would feel super weird bringing a game I bought on Kickstarter to my friend local game store, but how do you spread it amongst a small group of friends? Well, that's the question, right? Like, how do you spread it amongst a small group of friends? Unless you have the local gaming space in your house or you have a club or you have like an offsite, gaming thing that's not necessarily tied to a store, you're going to have to sort of grin and bear it. What I would do if I was in that case, I would say, hey, I kickstarted a game. I understand I'm the worst person to talk to you about this, Mr. Retailer, because I already own most of the things I wanted to own, but can I give you a demo maybe of the game? Can I come bring it in and show you it in case you want to stock it? Because I would love to play games with people here, and I would like to do a demo night for this game. So I'm going to show it to you first. If you think it looks cool, I'll give you a demo. I'll happily run demo nights in your store if you decide to bring it in and drum up some business for you, people that haven't played it before. That would be the route that I would take to try and do it, where you become an ambassador for that product. Even if it's just once a month, you do a demo game for it and it sits on the wall. You do that. Because that's the only way you're going to break those walls down, is if you're forthright and you address the whole issue head on and say, hey, like, I get that you don't sell this and I got it online. I'd like for this to make you some money because I'd love to have more opponents in place to play with. And more opponents for me means more business and sales for you. So let's talk about what that could look like and get that going. But obviously it takes a certain type of person to do those things. Dancing Pigeon says, because it's prepackaged, there's no secondary market that can self-sustain. Probably not. Rude says, what do we want? Going off on tangents. When do we want them? You have beautiful eyes. I was blessed. These baby blues have gotten a lot of the things for me in life. Oracle of Good says, Paul Vidal, that's what it's supposed to be, but bad apples have ruined that for me. Marius says, hey, I'm a bit late, but hello to everyone. Hey, Marius, how you doing, man? Hope everything's well over in Poland. Eugene Held says, hey, Ash, I'm painting Samurai for Osprey's Ronin. Any chance of seeing that in the channel? Only 10 minis per side. I'd love to. It's funny, I just had an email back from Christian Waters, who's my marketing contact for Osprey North America, about the fact that I hadn't seen anything. I used to be on the Osprey sort of like mailer for like getting to see new stuff, and nothing had shown up in like 5 months. And there was a game that I was really excited about coming out, and I was just wondering, I'd seen other people reviewing it, and I was wondering what had happened. So hopefully I'll get to see a copy of Ronin as well, because it looks super cool. I do want to try some more Samurai games. It's funny, I was actually supposed to be building stuff while I'm talking to you guys, but I got distracted when I muted my mic. I'm building some more of these awesome Ito clan for Bushido, which would work great for all the Samurai games. And I do want to get to try and build some of the Samurai from Warlord as well for their little Samurai game, which is called, I can't remember right now. They're all called something like Bushido. I can't remember what it's called right now. But the Samurai game from Warlord, which looks fast and fun too. Mary says, I'll try my question again. What do you think about elaborate narrative campaigns and skirmish games? Any tips for doing such a thing with people from outside of a wargaming hobby circle? You mean like an RPG style thing? So I'm not maybe the best person to ask that, because my joy in tabletop skirmish games and what my friends and I think do best, which you guys see in the channel, because you guys, when you watch us play skirmish games, you typically come along with me and my friends as we play these games. And what we tend to do is we let the game tell the story and we fill in the holes, you know what I mean? So like when a random event happens, like for instance, an injury or, someone gets jumped or something untoward happens in the dice, we always just in the spur of the moment come up with something to justify it in our heads, and that tends to build the story. So for instance, in Swineland, it was a combination of, we had the models we wanted to paint, we had an idea, which was Animal Farm basically, and we had a set of missions, and we just basically took each mission we hadn't played yet and gave it a narrative tie to the next one, and then whatever had happened during the game would just tell the story. So we tend to use the game as an excuse to drive our storytelling, as opposed to vice versa, where you're using RPG elements outside the game to drive whatever's happening next in the story. So if I was to do it that way, there was a great old article, I don't know if you can find it online somewhere, from White Dwarf, which was about how to do a narrative campaign. And it was basically how to write a flowchart. Is you have a beginning, right, where everyone starts off, and then you have plot points, and then it's who wins, you go left, right. And then it just branches. It's called a tree campaign. It just branches left and right from there. And then they can go back either way based on who wins each mission too. So that's typically, if you're going to do an RPG, a DM style one, that's your DM screen. Is you have the tree campaign sort of as your notes for what should be happening, and that helps you set up and write the missions too. And then what you do is you make briefings for the commanders, right, that tell them what happened beginning and after the game. And you can have all that stuff pre-made too, so you can do all that role-playing stuff afterwards. You can even give them decisions to make during the games, like, do you detonate this thing full of, like, let's say supplies? Do you burn down this building full of hostages? Like, whatever it is you want to have that can affect the tree as well. So, like, instead of like win lose, there could be win but did this, lose but did this, win but did this, lose but did this. So it can go different directions as well and have other consequences. And that would be how I would handle it. So if you wanted to add a narrative element like that, you can do great things with almost any game system, because it just has to be a war game. It doesn't have to have necessarily like a narrative element, like a campaign style game, and it can just be based on either in-game events, like you set up secondary objectives and stuff like that, or you give options to the guys in the beginning in their briefing cards, and then it has consequences where they just fall down the tree. So that would be my 2 cents, and it's a lot of fun. I have done it in the past myself, and it can generate a lot of fun in just like random 40k games or whatever. It doesn't have to be a campaign skirmish game. It could be almost any game when you use like a ladder style narrative. Rob Cunningham says Joni and the Hospitallers sound like a great metal band. yeah, it's true. Joni and the Hospitallers now opening for the Runaways in 1976. Barry White says, Kodiak Bennett says, are you also opposed to companies like Weird who are using Kickstarter for their new games? No, I'm not opposed to Kickstarters, period. I should actually be really clear about that. I'm exhausted by Kickstarters. And I think that launching a new title, doing a new pre-order, that falls in that category of, well, if you're interested in doing that, why is that not coming from a reinvestment in your current business model? Like, what is it about your business that's causing you to do it this way, as opposed to taking the capital you have from the ongoing sales of your current product and investing it in starting a new game? That's where my mind goes to, because I worry when a company starts doing that. It's because their capital put aside to invest is low and they don't want to risk it. And so they're taking outside capital in a pre-order system and they're doing it that way. So Weird has been great about having monthly releases. They've actually gotten great about getting off of doing pre-orders off their own sites too and sharing it with retailers again. But I worry that like when they start doing Kickstarters, they might get into a cycle of them. You know what I mean? Where they're not just having a great set of monthly releases, not doing Monday previews, all things that Weird does really well. I hope don't get distracted by something like a crowdfund. That would be it. Because I think Weird has a great business model when it comes to doing like consistent release and always having something new for their customers to look at and buy. I would be very upset if that got derailed by them getting into like a Kickstarter sort of like thing. Barry White says, hey Ash, quick question. Was wondering if you would see Strange Aeons or Kingdom Death in channel, both good games, and need more games online, like better quality videos. Strange Aeons for sure. I was actually supposed to be in touch with Uncle Mike. If you ever see Jason, who plays, he did the original videos for me with This Is Not Test. And he's played a bunch of like Shadow War and stuff with me too, and Infinity. He's actually friends. He lived in Calgary, and he knows Mike from Uncle Mike Worldwide, and he played tons of Strange Aeons with him. And we've been talking about it actually since like since we met each other basically. About doing Strange Aeons, and I actually have the original Strange Aeons Kickstarter kicking around still. I have like the resin H.P. Lovecraft and the Cultists and little resin boxes and stuff. I never painted them because I never really play with, but it's now into a new edition, so all the stuff I have, the rulebooks and stuff I have are old. But yeah, no, I'd love to get in touch with Uncle Mike because we know some common people in Canada. And he's another Canadian miniature company, so I love supporting him. And like actually do something because I love that it's a 24-inch game too. It's like Bushido. It's on a 2-foot board. And it's that pulpy era stuff too. Actually, in Pulp Miniatures too would be great for it, which is another Canadian company in BC. Do some great stuff. Keith says, as a result, the only thing I kickstart are board games, where I buy one set of minis, and that's all I need. That's all that's needed to play, so you need to depend on people buying their own forces. Yeah, I think that's a good bet, Audrey. I think that if you look at Kickstarters, hang on. I got baby girl. Hang on 1 second, and let's figure out what she wants. What's up? What's up, kiddo? And we're back. She's at that stage now where she just knows you guys are here on Mondays, and so I just distract her with my iPad. So she's watching a movie on the iPad, and yeah, when it ends or pauses or says, "Do you want to watch another episode?" then she comes out and gets me. And sometimes she falls asleep. What else we got? I buy good games and good minis. More will stay out of my old boy's Warman's room. That's fine. It's not so much morals for me though. It's more a what it does for me is what it does to me as a wargamer. You know what I mean? If I don't get to see something for 6 or 8 months, I'm just not excited about it anymore. Quinn Murphy says, "I hear cat." Yep, you did. James Pepper, same with All Quiet on the Martian Front. I was robbed of $50 for a Kickstarter. Something called Cairn. What else we got? Aviad Madar says, "I'd rather skip the Kickstarter exclusive swag and just wait to get a couple months later if the game comes out and gets any traction." That said, might back something just for the minis and don't use them in other games. That's true. We've got, I'm not sure what this says. "Don't lie, Ash. We know that is for you to keep from interrupting recording. Cutthroat cure." Oh, you mean the bathroom? He's talking about the potty. Who Took My Dice says, "Repin the dad life." I don't even know what that means. Random Crap Name 80 says, "Any advice for a first purchase for someone looking to start recording and streaming games?" Streaming games or recording games? Because streaming and recording are two very different. If you're going to record games, you can get away with a nice $300 Canon Vixia Handycam as long as you use it right and you understand what its limitations are and what it can and can't do. Get lots of light, just light, as much light as humanly possible, because the more light you have, the better your shots are going to look. And actually, the more it's going to make a cheaper camera act like a more expensive camera because it's not struggling to actually like pull the colors into the shot. And then if you're going to stream games, it's things like capture cards and mics, and there's a bunch of other things that go into streaming games that are outside. Like, so for instance, for me to stream just these videos, I need to get a $300 Blackmagic capture card for my MacBook because it can't stream natively with an external camera. Now, what's cool about that camera or the Blackmagic card is my sister, who's awesome, got me an Xbox One for my birthday, and I could actually even just route my Xbox One's HDMI output into it and stream games off that if I want to. I can stream anything through it now. Any kind of like outside port I can just put into it and stream it in. So it's interesting. But yeah, no, just a lot of light, a good like space, a high table, and a little 300-hour Canon Vixia if you're going to be recording. If you're going to be doing streaming, do research because it all depends on what your hardware setup is like for what you can actually stream with and how you want to stream. But that same camera will stream if you want to do. Oric Lovegood says, QOTMF, come immediately to mind. AQOM. All Quiet on the Martian Front, come immediately to mind. Those guys are mom and pop startup and just bit off more than they could chew. Shocker, there's always a chance you get nothing. There's no repercussions for Kickstarters that do not deliver. There aren't. That's right. Speculative investment. Kodiak Ben says, Cutthroat, I love watching you play Trollbloods. Cool. Rob Cunningham says, or the comic book artist who got all the comics printed sat in his house, and then by the time he could work out the shipping, it just breaks him, so he just starts burning the comics. It's going to happen. I'm catching up on the comments now, and they're commenting on things that I've been talking about for a while. What else we got? Tim Berry says, I think some of the companies look at Kickstarter as a way to gauge the interest in their product. If the Kickstarter fails, it can cause them to rethink what they're doing. Yeah, I could see that, but honestly, if you want to gauge interest in a product, there's a million other ways of doing it. A lot of people will, so for instance, if you're looking at a war game and you want to soft start a faction, a lot of war games will soft start factions by making them be like a mercenary unit in someone else's faction, right? So like, for instance, the dwarves in the War Machine are almost a faction of themselves now, but they started off life as mercenaries that would just be included in other people's armies. So I think there's a million ways of doing that without resorting to Kickstarter that will actually give you better data as to the interest in that thing than Kickstarter will. Because Kickstarter is going to happen, it's going to go outside your fan base too. Whereas if you want to pull internally your current existing customers, there's a million different ways of doing that through selling them stuff even that wouldn't have to be through a Kickstarter. Drummer Danny says, I got buddies in Abu Dhabi that watch your channel. That's awesome. Crazy. I wonder where that would show up in my metrics. That's super cool. Apollon's 002 says, I ain't sick of Kickstarters, but the waiting period. So, for example, I want to Kickstart Game of Thrones minis, but they have a 9-month period of wait after that. To be honest, I'll just wait and see what the unlocks are at the end. Well, there's that too, right? Like, if you want to get a bunch of free stuff for Kickstarter exclusives, that's cool. But you could also just, like you said, you could just wait until the end, see what gets unlocked, maybe Kickstarted, or you could just wait until it's in your retailers and buy it from them too. Aaron F says, happy belated birthday, Ash. I love the new Vans. Yes, I also love the new Vans. They're awesome. My wife got me, if you guys haven't seen it on my Facebook page, she got me a pair of custom Vans, actually printed apparently in Victoria, BC on Johnson Street, right by the old Games Workshop store on Johnson Street in Victoria. So shout out to the Victoria crew and all the folks out there in BC. With my kids' faces on them. So it's literally, she just randomly asked me, I knew it was going to be something to do with like printing my kids, because she asked me what my 2 favorite photos of the kids were. And they're actually, one's a photo of my daughter playing leaves at my mom and dad's house, and the other one's a photo of my son running around at our family farm outside. They're both weirdly wearing a toque from Roots, which I bought them, a different toque. It's the same style toque in different colors that I bought them in the fall, and just running around outside. And it's their faces like printed on my shoes, and they were rad. They tore up my feet, because like, if anybody who's ever worn new Vans knows, like, there's a breaking in period where like they're just gonna tear up your feet. And I literally wore them downtown Toronto. We took the kids to the aquarium for my birthday, the Ripley's Aquarium in downtown Toronto, which you haven't been, is just like, it's so cool. Like, you literally like walk through tunnels, and you're 360 degrees in this huge like tube, like clear tube, and there's sharks swimming over you, and like manta rays, and like a sawtooth fish like just hanging out next to you. And then you go in these like big blacklit rooms, and it's just filled with jellyfish. There's just jellyfish already and stuff too. My kids were just in awe. Like, it was expensive, and it was a zoo. Like, it was so busy because it's summertime, but they loved it. Like, they thought it was the coolest thing they'd ever seen. So yeah, no, it was awesome. But like, I spent literally like 9 hours walking around downtown Toronto, most of it carrying my daughter on my back because she wouldn't walk, and like the backs of my heels were just torn off. But luckily, my mother-in-law bought me a pair of new Birkenstocks, which I hadn't had since the 90s probably, which I then was able to rest my feet by wearing. And they gave me different blisters, because as you all know, there's a breaking in period for sandals as well. What else we got? Aaron F says, you're right, but that seems to happen only the first time around. So like Manic's first one, I don't know what that means. Mini Warrior, Kickstarter, buy something and lose interest in it before you get it. That's a whole other thing. It's so funny. We used to talk about that, we're talking to retailers about how the most excited anyone's going to be about a product is when they first see it. And so even just like getting people to play a game they've already purchased 9 months later, they might not be as excited as when it first comes out. There's something really, really key about the energy you get when you first see something. And then get to go and do it. So if you were able to buy a game right away, and then, you know, it ships to you the next week, and you have it, you crack it open, you and your friends will play it to death. And there's something to be said for that, I think, as opposed to having a big like cooling off period where you don't necessarily get to buy it or get to play it. Gakillian says, Mark II getting back into Infinity. What's Wotan been about, and why are Yu-Ching players slightly disappointed by it? Going by the forums. Well, we didn't do so good. I was one of those Yu-Ching players. We didn't win all our games. We got beat up a little bit. It has something to do with just number of reported games too. There's more panel players than I think there's anything else in Infinity. And Wotan was a worldwide campaign where basically for fun, you play through narrative missions. They give you a new mission pack every 2 weeks. And where she is, and we're off again. What do you need to do? You need to go to the potty? Yeah. Okay, let's go. One more time. We'll be right back. Are they okay? Let's get you sorted out. Oh man, this is going to be one of those days, I guess. We're going to have all of the interruptions. We were talking about Wotan. So yeah, it was a way of like submitting games, telling a story, having a narrative, and it's basically to advance the plot line and also dictate some of what the new models and stuff that were coming out in the upcoming sort of like months and years for release for Infinity. So just a lot of fun, and I think it's going to be a thing they do every year with Beasts of War to just like give people a reason to play a bunch of narrative games. I had a good time doing it. We did a game every week, and it was a lot of fun, like basically just focusing on one army and getting to paint and play it for, I think we did 11 games, so it was a good time. It was a lot of fun. We've got it's the chat's gotten away from me here for a second. Here we go. Do you think that some small companies see Kickstarter as the only way to compete in the industry? Scott Herman says. Absolutely. I think at this point it's actually become even less about the money necessarily, like the investment capital, because some of those companies might have it already. It's actually about the exposure. Because if you get into the Kickstarter metrics, you get pushed all over the place into Facebook, because it's in Kickstarter's best interest for you to succeed and make as much money as possible. So if you have a good looking product and it picks up and takes off, you're going to get free marketing basically from them on top of just what you can afford yourself or do through your own social media footprint. So it's a big deal. And I think that it's something that's actually getting used, like I said, not just because it gets you investment capital, but because the platform itself is a good way to get noticed. Aaron F says, I wish I could say that was my experience. You'd think Reaper and Tennis Studies Workshop would have the thing down and ship on time, but no. I haven't ever backed either of them, so I don't know. David Blanchard Wright says, hey Ash, do you think that the Kickstarter bloat will lead to big company games retaking the mainstream? Should have back from Victoria, BC. I don't know. I think that what's going to happen is that level of exhaustion, people are going to actually become more attached to games that have consistent releases, which I think is part of why Infinity's been so steady. Is they haven't broken form, they've kept to their sort of like business model, and they've had just consistent releases, stuff coming out, reasons to keep you interested in playing the game, and they've made a really concerted effort to get people playing the game in public. Their ITS system is absolutely the best. It's so funny because I complain about it when it breaks down, but it is the best and spoils you as a TO. Tournament management system, and even just like tournament promotion system, I think there is. Their models are beautiful. Their game is tons of fun. Yes, it's dense. Yes, it's a hard game to play, but I don't think that's actually a problem if you know lots of people playing it. If you can learn a game, if you don't have to learn a game by reading the rulebook, and you can go to a local gaming night and watch people play it and get a demo and learn from people who are actually playing the game, any game can become accessible. It's less about, I think, the accessibility of a game and more about are people playing it that can then help you to join that community and join that hobby, basically. And the more that grows, the more that sort of snowball effect happens, the more successful they are. So I think what's going to happen is the games that are consistent are going to be the ones that are going to stay and sort of like benefit from that Kickstarter exhaustion. Because I think there is something to be said for taking advantage of a vacuum, right? So the more people are sort of like getting their hooks into people's hobby, I guess is what I'd say, by having consistent releases and always by being present and not just for disappearing for 9 months after Kickstarter ends. That's the thing is you get all this signal when a Kickstarter is happening, and then maybe you get a monthly email. Like even if you don't get a monthly email, if you just get like updates, they're not really interesting. It's not people playing the game necessarily. So like if you go into like a 9 month to like a year development cycle to get stuff built, you're looking for other things to do. Like that's not you doing anything. It's just you having a bit of stuff communicated to you. So the people that are constantly giving you things to do are the ones you're going to gravitate towards, and be the sort of like lifelong hobby that you build into. Matt LeGray says, got to pop in for the end, right in time for the story with the shoes from Facebook. Yeah, that's right. Aaron F says, Ash, it's the tooks that make them for me. Toux. It's you spelling Toux. Toux, French word. Touque. Toque means beanie, I guess, in French. Hat if you're in England. Yeah. Beanie if you're in the US, actually, sorry. Chris asks, oh shit, that aquarium is fantastic. Yes, it is. It was fantastic. Back to historical games. What about Saga? I would love to do some Saga. I'll be honest. My rankings aren't painted, Eugene, because nobody's come to play me. That's the only reason. If I have a due date, if I have by X day, I need to have stuff painted so I can play somebody, it gets done. If I don't have that, it just sits in a box. I've got a million things I have to paint for whatever the next thing I'm doing is. Mike Wolf says, kiss the pony. No, I'm not kissing the pony. Fahad Malala says, oh, I just tuned in from Kuwait. What's the topic? Why would you be sick from Kickstarter if no one is forcing you to Kickstart anything? It's actually not, it's not me being forced to Kickstart something. It's the fact that Kickstarter has effect on the industry, right? So it means that companies communicate differently. Companies go silent for 9 to 12 months at a time, and their release schedules change based on their companies that are either using Kickstarter or not using Kickstarter. And it's very evident when you sit back in the market and you look at the companies that are, the companies that aren't, how that affects sort of like their release plan, their schedule, and how they do things. So that would be why. Tim Barry, it's the Oh Shiny effect. Absolutely. What else? Urza says, yeah, the life of being a dad. You are correct. Fad Malala says, what are your top 3 miniature war games? Oh, geez, that's a good question. It's funny because that always changes, right? That's always changing based on sort of like what I'm currently doing, what I'm enjoying. And then there's like an all-time list, like games that I could just unpack and play again anytime. And then there's like my current interest list, because those are two different things, right? Because the all-time list is games that you've played in the past that you really enjoy that you may not get to play anymore because the company could be gone. And if I was to pick my all-time game list, it would definitely be things like Rackham's Confrontation, because it's just it's a big piece of my like gaming history and my love of gaming. Epic 40,000, because it's probably... Sorry, Epic Armageddon. Not just Epic 40,000. But all of the Epic leading up to that. Because it's a game that I played right from almost the beginning of my hobby journey. Like, it was one of the earliest Games Workshop games I played. And it's a wonderfully elegant game. It lets you play Warhammer 40k the way that everyone wants to play Warhammer 40k, but it actually is balanced, right? So, like, you can have the Titans and the airplanes and the spaceships overhead bombarding the planet, and the companies of Land Raiders and all that stuff. And the game works because it's designed to work that way. Instead of making the table bigger and playing with more models, they made the models smaller, and you can play with these huge companies and divisions and stuff like that. And the last one's Blood Bowl. And Blood Bowl's not really a miniature war game. It's actually a board game played with miniatures. But I have a real soft spot in my heart for Blood Bowl because of the amount of it I've played, and B, it was the game that my dad bought me and brought me back from Oxford in the UK during like a business trip. And it was one of those games that we always talked about. So like, it has a very like strong connection with me and my family, just because it's such a silly fun game. It's just a laugh. Like it's one of the few miniature war games you can play where you're actually gonna hear like legitimate cheering from the people watching it, and it's almost as fun to watch if you're with a group of friends as it is to play, because there's literally like highs and lows, touchdown moments, TSN turning points, like all that stuff happens in Blood Bowl. And then sort of like current games that I could be playing. That I'm really, really enjoying right now. Dark Age is definitely one of them, for a bunch of reasons, mostly because of its accessibility. It's so easy to teach. I just played a game of Dark Age against someone. It was their first game this past weekend, and I watched them enjoying it. I watched their brain figuring everything out, and they never had to open a rulebook. They could play it by just looking at what was on the cards. I think there's something really great about that. Bushido's another one, because it's kind of an inheritor to Rackham's Confrontation, because it's such a kitchen table game, because it's played on such a small area. And it's such a wonderfully contained game. Like, it happens in 3 turns. There's a lot of like resource management, like as your action points are going and stuff like that, becoming tired, becoming exhausted. And the last one, currently, it's hard to be tied for third. I don't really know. There's a whole bunch of games I really enjoy playing. I would say Frostgrave and This Is Not Taster up there. I would also say that I'm really enjoying Legends of the Old West, for what I got to play of it. The new Silver Tower from Games Workshop was fantastic. I hope I just emailed Danny back, actually. He sent me an email after the first episode came out, talk about when we could do the next set, hopefully do the next 3. We can probably finish the whole campaign in like 2 more visits, so if he comes by, we can probably do 3 more episodes, and there's 9 total in the quests for like the shards for it. So 2 more visits, we can probably crank out the whole thing and do all 9 episodes. And then I know he wants to do the Helden Hall one too. He hasn't opened the box yet because he was trying to finish paying the first one, but Helden Hall was probably on the table as well because that was a lot of fun. Gore Chosen I liked a ton. The number 3 spot's just I can't even fill it because it's just there's so many games that it could be filled by. So yeah, there's my answer for that one. Short story long. Alexander Cheng says, from a Kickstarter creator's point of view, don't think I would have been able to manufacture that crowdfunding. I don't think I could have had creative control if I sold the design to a publisher. Alexander, he did Gigarobo. So hey Alex, I'm glad you're here. And absolutely, I think Alex, and he, for the rest of you guys watching, you fall into that category I'm talking about of it's the original the original intent of Kickstarter, right? To take entrepreneurs and to get them to make something and put it out there. If you wind back the tape, I don't know how long you were watching, but I talked exactly about that about probably like 10 minutes ago. Actually, probably more than that because of the interruption by my daughter. but how there's like the original intent of what it is, which is it's an investment capital place for entrepreneurs that want to make something from scratch. And then there's the existing people using it for a capital influx to try and bring things into production. And how those are very different things. I think from Alex's point of view for Gigarobo, it was exactly that, like that board game marketing thing where he had a design, he liked it, he didn't want to sell it, so he made it himself, and it did those two things I talked about earlier, where it not only made it available for production, he was able to put it in production, it was done, it was ready to play, I played the pre-production copy of it, but it also put his name out there, so now that's your resume. If Alex, you ever want to go work for a board game company, you have that talent pool thing from Kickstarter now that you've got to show off, which is your game, which is great, by the way, and which Owen played a ton of when he was at Adepticon with you again. Aaron F says cat sighting. Yep. Cat quietly left. She does that now, man. She's sneaky. She comes in, comes out. Kickstarter says Jay Aiken. Kickstarter is what got me back into mini wargaming after being out for over a decade. I'm not surprised. It's an easy way to get a whole bunch of things. Yeah, Killian says, since you're tied to Kickstarters, what do you think could be Kickstarter that would grab your attention and wallet again? Just something new. Like, the difference is I don't want to wait for things. I don't necessarily want to wait for things. I like Kickstarters that are new where it's ready to go. Someone's already risked some of their capital getting it ready to be made, and the Kickstarter delivers in a month. You know what I mean? Like a month after close, everything starts getting shipped because they've got it in production. It's really just send some emails and push some buttons, and the cash comes in, we start shipping stuff to backers. I'm okay with those. I'm okay with the speculative stuff. I'm not necessarily interested in backing it myself, but like the speculative stuff where like I've got an idea, I want to start something from scratch, I'm okay with those too. It would have to be pretty unique. Like the last thing I think I kickstarted actually was Joey's hardcover rulebook for This Is Not a Test. And that was because I wanted a hardcover rulebook for This Is Not a Test. It was the only way he could do it. Like it's again, he's a one guy. He's the CEO and head janitor at World's End Publishing, is what he says on his business cards. And that's exactly, that would be the thing I would want to do. I know this person, they have everything ready to go. They just want to be able to send it to people. Those I'm okay with. And literally within a month I had everything. You know what I mean? The book was in my hands. It was all printed and shipped and stuff. So, or like 2 months or whatever it was. And so that's the kind of thing that I'm probably going to do. So like, for instance, if someone I know wrote a really cool game and it was always available digitally and they wanted to make a hardcover ready, that's the kind of thing I'd probably do. Or even just a lot of models. Like, let's say like tomorrow, let's say tomorrow, someone comes out with a line of miniatures and it's all of like, let's just say that it's just from Vanity's point of view, it's every wargaming YouTuber as like a character from their favorite game. So it's like all the guys from Mini Wargaming like as their favorite characters. It's all the guys from Beasts of War as like whatever their like contemporary characters is. It's a bunch of people from like different studios. So like it's all like the 80s GW design studio, all this like different factions from Games Workshop. And some sculptors just gone crazy. I'm probably just selling the world's best idea right now. He's gotten likeness rights for all these people and he's made a ton of miniatures for them. Or like someone does something crazy like all of the Fighty Fantasy monsters is like a line of miniatures, like something like that. I would probably go and do it. Not because it's for any particular reason, because it like keys into some kind of nostalgia button for me and it tweaks my brain. That's probably the only reason. Aaron F says cats left the building. Anthony, one more cat bomb, it'll be a hat trick. A cat trick, it would be. Nicely done, Anthony. I see what you did there. Dad jokes. I'm getting dad jokes back at me. Judge Lazar, word of advice, if you ever get the insane idea to paint your science and veteran guardsmen with Flector and camo pattern, don't. 3 days later and I have 5 of 40 done. Yeah, no, I just wouldn't paint Flector anyway. That's just a terrible idea. Buy a sponge, I guess is my only thing I would say, and just sponge it. Scott Herman, having met the team that made Blood and Thunder at Historicon and have them spend the time talking about their game, it gives me a good feeling of backing the latest Kickstarter. For sure, yeah. They've done a really cool like bunch of stuff through Kickstarter. Ash question. I see that you haven't played Wildest Exodus. How come I bought the book and read it and it seems interesting and fast? The models seem good. Waiting for the starter pack. No particular reason, man, except for nobody's played it around here. I would happily do it if somebody wanted to bring it in. I'll be honest. That's really the only reason. I've got my Legends of the Old West playing for cowboy stuff, and also I'm really excited for 1888 Dracula's America to come in from Osprey, because that's the new horror-themed cowboy game where Dracula becomes president of the United States after the Civil War. That's going to be cool, too. Drummer Danny says, what's your favorite miniature game? I think I just answered that. Top threes from history and current. Although the third one was kind of a weak answer. Rasterman 2009 says, Epic Armageddon, Blitzkrieg Commander, Kings of War. Definitely good ones. Absolutely. Rasterman says, indeed, I now have over 150,000 points for the Epic Armageddon. It's so awesome. They get the combined arm stuff down on that one. They absolutely do. What's interesting is the size of my Warhammer, my Epic 40k collection is basically limited by how many Titans and airplanes I have painted, because I have way too many Titans and airplanes. I would have to play to use all of my Titans and airplanes, because only a third of your army can be Titan support in Imperial Navy and like average Imperial armies. And I probably have 9,000 points for the paint. I'd have to play a 27,000 point game to use it all. But it adds up fast. I mean, a Warlord Titan in Epic is 850 points. He's almost 1,000 points by himself. So 2,000 points was the standard size game. I think it was 2,000 points. It might have been 3,000 points. I can't remember what the tournament size was. I think it was 2,000 points. It was 3,000 points, because that was the only way you could take a Warlord Titan. Because you could take a Warlord Titan and 2 Thunderbolts, basically. And that would be like your whole support section. You have 2,000 points of other stuff. But I mean, a Rust company of 10 Russes is 650 points. Like, it adds up fast in that game. And Aaron says, Cat Hat Trick. Yep, we did it. Kickstarter is definitely... Kujaku DM says, how about some more Blood Bowl bat reps? It's definitely something that could happen. I just need people to come in and play more than anything else. That's the number one thing. People want to come in and play, and we will definitely play more Blood Bowl. What else we got here? Gorchosen, it's a good game. Say it. I did say it. I said Gorchosen's great. Did you see that the new White Dwarf has a comment about Necromunda news coming this? Yeah, no, I'm excited about that. I think what's really cool is that Necromunda is back on the table, I think, now as a possibility because of Shadow War. Because Shadow War wasn't the Forge World studio. It was the main studio that made it. And it was mostly just to sell, I think, that scenery. And because the scenery is coming out, we've got like a huge opportunity now to see some, some Necromunda happening, because there's that scenery requirement that you have in Necromunda. It's already done. They don't have to get money or production time or whatever to make scenery to play it. There's Underhive scenery ready to go. So you just need to make some gangs and we're ready to rock and roll. And I'll be jazzed for Necromunda, but it's got to be Necromunda. It's got to be in Necromunda. It's got to be those gangs, that personality. I don't want anything else. And I will paint so much Necromunda. We will play so much Necromunda. It'll be ridiculous. Calro says, how are your Space Wolves for Horus Heresy? They're still just a squad and a guy. I'll be honest, I'm waiting until the new Horus Heresy rulebook drops, because I don't want to do anything that's offside. I mean, I'm sure the rules won't change for like the legions and stuff yet, but I'm just holding off, because until everything comes out, like if weapon stats change or if weapon profiles change, I don't want to have anything like basically break down on me. So I'm gonna wait until that rulebook launches to see what happens. Gorchers is awesome. I just had a custom map made for 8-player games. I saw it. You posted on I think you posted on my Facebook page, didn't you? Or maybe you tagged me on Twitter. Yeah, you tagged me on Twitter. That was what it was. Yeah, it looks awesome. 8-player game is gonna be crazy. Quinn Murphy says, Mike's now talking politics in the chat. We don't care what's going on with Anthony Scaramucci, man. This is a Wargaming chat. If you want to talk to me about that, message me on Facebook. And now Quinn's like, oh my god, you're right. That's hilarious. Alexander Chang says, howdy Ash, I'll check out the earlier part of the stream. Yeah, for sure, man. Well, I talk about I do an editorial at the beginning. Ignore the part where my mic's off and skip like a minute in. Which is me talking about that, where my brain got to this thing about Kickstarter exhaustion. And then there's actually a bit about, I think, the differences between different types of Kickstarters. And I think you firmly fall into like the entrepreneurial part of it and the board gaming part of it too, not necessarily the wargaming part of it. Paul Vidal says, Ash, what countries do you think have the most interesting gaming and culture / meta? That's a really interesting question, because it almost, so like if you look at miniature wargaming as having like an epicenter, it's probably the UK, right? It's the place where it first gained, I guess, like a level of saturation where there was like brand recognition, where people knew what Warhammer was and Games Workshop was. And so it kind of, if you look at it as like an explosion, a big bang, it spreads out from the UK. And everywhere, it's both socially accepted and accepted. And I think what's interesting is it tends to be more socially accepted in things like university towns, where you've got a higher percentage of people playing games maybe that are also socializing, and they're young and like around. So like, for instance, in Toronto, and this isn't just miniature wargames, this is board gaming as well. About 10 years ago, a place opened called Snakes and Lattes. And Snakes and Lattes was a coffee shop where a husband and wife, woman who was a pastry chef, and a husband who was just a board game collector. He had like 600 board games. Like he was like pack rat board game collector. He had copies of games. Like that Fireball Island game, he has like in box still. They opened a little patisserie and like board game place, and you could basically rent board games. You rent table time. You go up and you buy your coffee or whatever, and you're Danish, and you sit and you play board games. And it's like a little lending library, a huge lending library with like tons of board games. And it was right on Blue or East, I think downtown. I can't remember. It's by U of T. It was near U of T. And it was hugely popular because it was right near the university. Kids would come on their breaks. They'd go after work. They'd go play. Like wait times, waiting lists, made tons of money. They actually started a little vendor section too, so a little retailer section where they'd sell board games. So you could demo them and then take them home. And it became massively popular. And so I think it's interesting because where is the coolest culture for that stuff? I think that every country has a place that is cooler than other places. You know what I mean? So like that's a really cool place. For instance, Snakes and Lattes, and actually there's a bar now called Snakes and Lagers that you can go to. It's licensed that does the same thing. And those places started popping up all over the place. And every city kind of has one. There's even one in Niagara Falls called the Geekery, which is a pub, and you can go play board games and stuff. And I'm actually running a tournament for Dark Age there in September. It's just, you have to know where they are. So it's kind of a place that I think you have to hunt down. And then in the UK, it's usually clubs. Usually the coolest geek culture stuff is all in clubs. And you have to kind of almost like know the secret handshake or the knock to get in, or find out about them somewhere. Although they did a good thing at the Club Network with Workshop where you could find those things in the past too. What else we got? Quinn Murphy says, going off that, why do you think Europe has so many big wargaming companies? Just time. Quinn says, why do I think that is? I think it's just time. Is if you can show, so for instance, if a country has a valid track record in that market. So for instance, if you're in England and you've got an idea to start a miniature wargaming company, but you need financing, you need to go to a bank and let's say get a line of credit opened or get something opened. If you try to explain what your business model is to them, they're much more likely to understand you than, or even just get an investment capitalist to invest in you, to understand what you are and what you're planning on doing, than in North America. If you were to try and go to that same bank in North America, they'd be like, you want to what? You want to sell toys to kids? No, you can't have any money. If you just said iPad apps, you would have been fine. We would have given you $1 million in credit, but you said model toy soldiers, and we don't understand what that means. I think that's it. I think it's just a recognition in that industry that the Europe and the UK in particular, just it's known as an industry as opposed to in other places where it's not. And so people who do the background support structure stuff for just being a company, like banks and credit lines and all that stuff, they're more likely to deal with you if they understand what you're talking about than if they don't. And I think that's what it boils down to more than anything else. Rastaman 2009 says, I think the Brits got it rolling and the French didn't want to get left behind. It's true. I should jump to the mailbag. We have 3 questions in the mailbag, and I do want to answer them. So I'm going to jump over there. So, Will Overlord, it's all in like leet speak, numbers and letters, asks, are you going to do another preview game for Last Day soon? I love the look of it. I am. I'm actually talking to the marketing guys in the UK about what that's going to look like. I have a marketing plan for the game all put together. And what it's actually going to include, as opposed to just more demo games, there's going to be some demo games, but starting in the beginning of next year, or the end of this year, because I'm going to work on it at the end of this year, is you're going to get a walkthrough of everything in the game. So not just, because the game's changed significantly from what you guys have seen so far, not the gameplay per se, like the internal stuff of the game, like how you move around, how you shoot and stuff, but more actually how you approach the game, like how the game feels. You're going to get a series of videos leading up to giving demos and stuff at Adepticon next year, talking about how the game works. And so I think you guys are going to be excited about that because it's going to go through making a warband, what the design ideas were behind making a warband, how that came up with that. There's actually a whole part in the beginning of the book about like where my brain's at with game design right now. And in between that, I'm going to do some of that stuff. I'm going to preview it for patrons on Patreon. So if you are a patron on Patreon, you'll be getting to see that stuff before everybody else because it'll all be sort of behind closed doors. And then my test audience too. So if it really sucks, they'll tell me like, Ash, go reshoot this. It's garbage. And I want to be able to do it with a lot of the nuts and bolts and stuff too, because I've got some exciting stuff going on behind the scenes for like things like scenery and tokens and that sort of stuff too. So you'll get to see some of that in those videos too. And of course that stuff's kind of, there's moving pieces that's being produced and worked on right now. So yeah, it'll be done and it'll be pretty. But of course there's time leading up to it being done and it being pretty. What else we got in the mailbag? Next up is Inagataba. Inagataba. He actually gave me pronunciation instructions. Inagataba. I don't know. Hey Ash, just cut off watching all your Piece of Ash videos now. I got a laundry list of questions. How many can I leave at a time on SurveyMonkey? As many as you want. Feel free to dump as many as you want in here. The great thing about the SurveyMonkey questions is if it's a live show that's slow getting going, and there's not a lot of questions. Like usually the chat is like way past me, but for instance, in my Patreon one, sometimes I get through like the chat's like kind of like quiet, and I need stuff to talk about. The more full the mailbag is, the better. So please fill up the mailbag as much as you want. And the last one is Blugman's Glowworm. Tom Kirby announces retirement after GW's reports a 30% increase in revenue under Kevin Roundtree. Do you think GW is hitting another life stage? Oh, they definitely are. I think we talked about that last time. Of just the life cycles in businesses, right? And I think what's happened is Workshop in particular. You've seen with the birth of Warhammer TV and the new sort of like faces of Games Workshop, guys who may have been there for quite a long time. So, for instance, Duncan's been there for a while. I think he started in retail actually, and he's been around, but like he's like the grinning face of Games Workshop. You know, he's the what's that guy's name? Oh my gosh, I'm gonna date myself again. He's the what was the guy's name from the Diet Coke commercials? Max Overdrive or something like that. Max Headroom. He's the Max Headroom. He's the floating head that you all recognize. He's the Max Headroom of Games Workshop. I can't believe I just made a Max Headroom reference. That's awesome. I'm so excited I did that. If you just Google Max Headroom and you'll know what I'm talking about. It's a great actually. I think he's a Canadian actor. Steve, what's his name? He was in Dawn of the Dead, the remake in 2003. He gets killed. He was on Psy Factor. He's a Canadian actor. He's terrible. I think he was in Lawnmower Man 2. But yeah, no, Max Headroom. Fantastic stuff. Yeah, no, they're clearly hitting a life cycle stage where, you know, guys who are there, you know, are just hitting that age where they leave companies. Like they're retiring, and they're going, you know, to do other things. And so a younger generation is taking over. But what's interesting is this is a generation of people taking over Games Workshop who've been, they're hobbyists. They're guys who've been fans of Games Workshop. So where you've got this previous generation where there are people that created what Games Workshop is, but there wasn't a Games Workshop before them. These are people who are previous fans of the business starting to work for the company. And so I think they have more of a connection with the current customer base because they were them, right? Not so long ago. And so I think they just have a good sort of like level of empathy and communication skills with those people. They speak the same language. You see the same jokes. You see the same sarcasm and stuff in like the Warhammer TV jokes. The Stranger Things ad that just happened just recently for General's Handbook 2? Just made my day. Like it was so good. It looked like an Atari 2600 like video game ad from the 80s. With like lightning and thunder, and I think it was loosely based on the old Warhammer Quest TV ad, but it didn't have Saruman in it or the word broadsword because the guy can't say broadsword, so it's like broadsword. I attack with my broadsword. It was like the same sort of idea. Who's next? That was all the there's only 3 questions in the mailbag because I just blew through those. Let's go back to the chat. Andre Tanguay says, what would be the best wargaming table design? Ooh, that's an interesting question. It's funny because I've talked about this in the past where I think certain sizes of table are more popular than others, but I really think that the kitchen table game, the smaller skirmish games on like 3-foot tables are becoming more popular because of the aging market, right? The people that have money and free time, their interest is in games that set up really fast. They don't require a ton of models to paint and build and stuff. And they play on like a table size that can be done in your home. You don't have to have like a dedicated gaming space for it. You can play on your kitchen table. So I think those are actually becoming sort of like on vogue again. Gekillian says, why not play net epic Titan Legions lists? All Titans all the time. I guess I could. I need more epic opponents, really more than anything else. Aaron F says if it means the opportunity to restock Hive Ganger minis, that's like kidding. I think GW does the process would be great. Yeah, it's true. I knew Necromunda would be fun. What else? Rasmussen at Gekalian, there's one in Epic Armageddon as well. It's truly nice, but balanced enough that you won't just steamroll the opposition, even if you're all Titans. Yeah, it's true. There's the Epic A Titan list is actually really cool. The Griffin one. Everyone's chatting now about things without me. Where are we going? Audrey Keith says, the Wargaming Club model seems strange to me as a Canadian. Where do you guys meet? Do you pay monthly dues? Is it free to play? Do you need to pass some sort of entry exam? Is there a vote? I think it all depends. Like in the UK, these are pretty probably established organizations, and if you treat them seriously, they tend to thrive. But you need someone to put up money, right, or a group of people that are serious enough that they're willing to put up money to have a space off-site or to meet somewhere off-site. Think of them like a Boy Scout club. They're not really alien. They just have to do with something that's not a typical topic. You know what I mean? So like, they could meet anywhere. They could meet in church basements. They could meet wherever. They could meet anywhere there's a space with folding tables, basically. You could have a club. And they were really popular in Europe because, and in the UK, because space is at a premium. There's a lot of people living in a small space. So sharing space is something that those people are very used to. Of course, as Canadians, we have more space than anything else. We have 35 to 40 million people living in, 1.5 times the size of the United States. So 1/10 the people living in 1.5 times the space. Now, granted that, 65% of that space is basically the surface of the moon, but we're living in the habitable areas, but space is not something that we lack. So we have lots of that. And so it's just something like culturally that we didn't gravitate to because we would just make our own spaces, But I played in claiming clubs in Canada. One that was just like a local guy. He had a big steel, those big steel Quonset huts that you can buy. He had one in his backyard that was his painting. It was just his gaming area. And it was big enough that he had like 2 or 3 gaming tables in it. And he would just go over and meet and play. I know Dave Taylor's got a buddy who's got a basement that's got 2 or 3 gaming tables in it. And he just has like 6 or 8 friends over and they have a gaming night. And so it's that kind of thing, right? Like a gaming club is a group of friends who just get together and play all the time. And organized or not, who knows? I've seen people share studio spaces in Toronto where they all rent a studio space, they all go in, they each pay, it's how much you want to pay. If you want to pay $50 a month to have your own gaming room, a lot of people in Toronto would be, so you could rent a 500 square foot space, put fridges in it, put a TV in it, put couches in it, put 3 or 4 gaming tables in it, and now all of a sudden you've got 8 guys maybe, let's say 8 or 9 guys, so you're paying $500 a month for a little studio space. That's like a working studio space, it's got no bathroom or anything like that. Maybe it has a sink or a kitchenette or a fridge. But it's just a space where you guys meet up and play. And I think there's enough people out there that would look at that as the price of a gym membership to go and play games. And I think it's culturally, are we used to doing that or not? Are we used to sharing space? And the bigger the city you live in, I think the more often you're open to doing those things. All right, we are coming up on the end. And I think that's pretty much it. Gary Powell says, sorry, it's just a note at gaming clubs. I run a really social games club. Don't have our own venue, but we meet in pubs and large function rooms. And we are D3AD on weekends. They're dead on weekends. There you go. The funds generally go towards senior board games, etc. There you go. So Gary's got the example of what that's like. We charge subscriptions and we make sure that we drink a lot to keep the pub happy. So hopefully they won't charge us. And that's it. I think a club is just a group of people who get together. If it has a venue or a home or not, it's just that, which is super cool. I'm glad somebody in the comments actually was running one. And then Nick says, Canada, come for the Tim Hortons, stay for the space. Wow, if you live in Ontario, the space isn't exactly cheap anymore. We had a whole lot of explosive growth in our property sector, but it's starting to calm down now. Anyway, we made it through with it's now called a cat trick. It's been named 3 visits from Cat, and my son waking up at one point and wanting a bottle, but he's now asleep. And we're pretty much ready to sign off. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed that. Next piece of ash will be on Monday next week. I am taking, just guys mark your calendars, I'm taking a week off in August. We're going to go to Grand Bend. I got to air out some camping gear, which is sitting down right here now. That little pile of stuff right there is an 8-man tent and some inflatable mattresses and stuff. I'm going to do the risky thing. I'm going to take my toddlers camping, but they're going to get to live on the beach for a week, basically, which is going to be pretty awesome. So Grand Bend is a beautiful spot out just north of Sarnia, and it's a provincial park called the Pinery. So if you're in the Pinery, for whatever reason, come say hi. I'll be on the beach the week of like the 21st through the end of that week, just hanging out, and I'm super stoked. A week outside, oh my gosh. But I won't be doing anything that week, obviously, because I'll be away. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this. We'll see you for another piece of ash next week on Monday. Until then, I'm Ash, and we're going.